Now that we've gone over the fundamentals, we can start talking about the tactical approach towards entrepreneurship. And this is what I call the groove. The groove has three parts. The first part of it is that there are certain principles that you need to kind of believe in for this to work. And if you believe in these principles, then everything else grows out of it. The way we can think of our universe is that it exists in 4 dimensions: X, Y, Z, and time. Objects have mass, and it's hard to get things going, and that's what we call inertia. Energy, in order to move that mass, we need energy. How fast it's going is velocity, and once it gets going, then we have momentum. The way you should think of your startup isn't this lean startup approach or whatever. The way you should think of it is physics, that your startup exists in 3 dimensions, and those 3 dimensions are marketing, product development, and your executive strategy. And so what your startup is about is you're taking your startup on this journey, and it's going to change with time. And so you're going to have to deal with all these things that you deal with in Newtonian physics, like energy, velocity. The way to think about your startups is inertia. The bodies stay at rest, and so you actually have to put in what's called activation energy just to get it going. Efficiency, how much energy do we need it to keep it going? And motion, what's the velocity? The groove focuses on how to propel your startup forward. How can we efficiently use energy? Is there something that can help us out? How do we get this universe to respond to us? This all started my approach towards dealing with uncertainty, because that's what this whole deal is. It's about uncertainty. And I said that in my younger days, I did Taekwondo. I got up to 3rd degree brown belt, and I was training for my black belt, and I blew my knee out. But this is my approach of taking on an opponent. The first thing I would do is come in, try a combination. If it didn't work, step out. Then I would rotate. This is what agility is about, and move to a different position. I would never stay in front of who it is I was sparring with. And why did I move at an angle instead of going forwards and back? It's because if I'm moving at an angle and I get hit, it's not flush force, it's the cosine of the force. And therefore, I wouldn't get hit as hard. And then I find a new position, and I would go in and come out again. And this is what experimentation is about. And then finally I go right, then I go left, and I'd be constantly circling, moving around, trying to find that opening. And once I got that opening, that's it. You saw, it's the kitchen sink. It's feet, it's knees, it's elbows, it's everything. Crack the sky, shake the earth. That was actually what the North Vietnamese said when they went all in Tet to come at the Americans. The nature of experimentation is to travel into the unknown. Engineers call it research, entrepreneurs call it hypothesis testing, innovators call it validation. But the foundation of all of this is uncertainty. What you're basically doing is traveling out into space. However, dealing with uncertainty creates certain things within you. One is unpredictability. And if things are unpredictable, that can lead to ignorance, that people start making assumptions that aren't true. Luck starts leading to irrationality. How many times do you hear people say, well, a startup is a 1 in a million shot? All I have to say is, if your startup is a 1 in a million shot, shut down immediately. Because in order for a 1 in a million shot to happen, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and a million. If you can guess it, you'll be successful. Irrationality. And also risk leads to stress. The loss of certainty results in the reduction of rationality. What happens is emotions begin to dominate when we have to deal with things that we don't know or don't understand. So we're prone to emotions, and you actually experience one 90% of the time. Here's how you get production and to move things forward. It's your drive, how hard you want to work, times your knowledge equals your output. Here's the problem. Drive and IQ are both issues with emotion. It reduces it. If you don't feel good, do you have the drive to do something? No, you become unmotivated. In terms of thinking straight and getting the most out of your conscious processing, if you're emotionally stressed out or something, you don't get the most out of yourself. And what does emotion impact? Production and efficiency. What production is that's how far am I making progress? Am I moving forward? And efficiency is how much does that cost to make that progress? And I actually had a friend at a startup. He asked me to look at a situation, and I just said, you're not going to make it. He said, why? And it's like, your burn rate is way too high. Your lifeblood is the cash you have, and it's a fuse that's burning, and eventually that fuse runs out if you can't go far enough. And so the cost for progress that we're making was just way too high. Uncertainty is a unique challenge. They give you all kinds of tools to do it, but they don't talk about the emotional aspects. Here's proof of the record in failure in certain ventures. Entrepreneurs, 10% successful, pharma less than 9.6%. Again, your chances of beating late-stage cancer are better than you being successful as an entrepreneur. The entrepreneurial challenge is, what do venture capitalists do? The success rate for startups has been constant for about 100 years, despite all this study and all this investment. And so what do entrepreneurs do? What do VCs do? They invest in a lot of companies, and their gain is how many they bet in times the probability that it'll be successful, and how much are they going to make. And what venture capitalists really do is they play roulette. They just keep putting chips down all over the table and hoping that their number comes up. Well, instead of focusing on this, why don't they focus on this in order to get the returns up? And so instead of focusing on the number of bets, focus on execution. The groove is about changing the way you look at things, creating different point of views, what frameworks work. And we have a lot of leadership skills, but not related to uncertainty. Intellectually, there are common responses to uncertainty. First, we're lost. We don't have a map. We don't know where we are. Plus, there's no reference. There's no compass. We don't know what up is. We don't know what down is. It's literally being just in the void of space. You have no idea where you're going. There's also the emotional toll, and that's that you get scared. And it's very, very natural for an entrepreneur to be scared. You get overwhelmed, and the strain catches up to you. And what that ends up becoming is creating inertia. That when you're overwhelmed, what do? You don't move forward, and it's hard to get you going again. Now, you could say to me, but Dr. Cho, there's so many different emotions. My roommate at MIT, Brett Hildebrand, he graduated with 3 degrees in 4 years in a summer. He had a bachelor's in computer science, a bachelor's in economics, and a master's in math. And he was actually one of the first people to write an AI poker playing game, where the game would actually learn as it went along. And I said, Brett, what about all the different emotions you have to deal with? And he said to me, emotions are way overrated. He said there's only a couple of emotions that really dominate in any given situation. And I sat down and thought about it, and I thought, he's actually right. And so these are the emotions that you, as an entrepreneur, are going to have to deal with. So my solution is the groove. Today we're going to talk about the guiding principles, where it's about perspective, potential energy, and humility. The mechanics will go on in the next lecture, and these are the technical things that you can do in order to be able to get this productivity and output. And finally, into the breach is when you're under live fire, what is it that you have to deal with? What is the mental game? This builds better mindsets to deal with uncertainty. Remember, we talked about the writer's focus. We need a new focus level. We talked about concentration. We talked about Dieter Rams, how everything mattered. We talked about the economist's focus, and that's that you make decisions to avoid sunk cost. The world is lazy and inertia is real. Nature always finds its lowest state. And this is why people don't like to change, because you need energy to do it. The architect's focus of how everything exists in layers. Do you understand what is related to something else? The next part is potential energy, and this is what I refer to as the momentum theory. Somewhere along the line, you need help, or you're never going to make it. Yet there has to be some kind of force or something that you can tap into and guide you along, sort of like wind at your back. And an example of it is actually marketing. If your customers weren't marketing for you, you would never make it, because every individual person would be a different market. However, because we have commonality, this is why marketing works. Potential energy we can tap into is momentum. The thing about momentum is a lot of people acknowledge that it exists, but it's difficult to quantify. And this is the way I look at things. Good and bad is always going to happen, and they're cyclical, and eventually they even out. So if you're going to get the most, if you believe this to be true, how do you get the most out of this? Well, to get the most out of this is put your energy into this and try to make and slow down going with this. When things are going bad, be patient. Eventually things will go positive. Yeah, and actually I came up with this entire momentum theory when I was 11 years old because I was just thinking about the cyclical nature of life. So when things are going bad, be patient. Slow it down. Don't flounder. Basically, you're a person in a net. The harder you resist, the more trouble you're going to be in. And then once you get to turn things around, then take it to the hilt. Push it. Because positive momentum doesn't last forever. Take advantage of it. For example, my reports. I would tell them if things are going well, if you're getting your experiments done, if things are being processed, if you want to stay later and keep it going, by all means do. I'll come in late the next day. And yet we don't manage to this. Here's why momentum matters. You start a task, you end at some point, and then you stop. And what happens the more time you spend stopping, the further back you go. How many times are you working on something and then you stop and you don't do it for a couple of days and you come back to it and you go, oh, what was I working on? Remember Ebbinghaus? And then you get started again in work. But then again, if you stop, you go backwards, and then you go forwards, and as you can see, the losses start to pile up. When we add this and this, we should be over here, and instead, we're over here. This is why you want large blocks of uninterrupted time. You want minimized distractions so you can shorten this up. This is where, when they say, let's back burner this and come back to it later, they think you're going to restart here. No, you're going to restart way back there. And it has consequences. Who dares wins. This is the slogan of British SAS, Special Air Services, which is their special forces. They've been doing this stuff for a long time. I absolutely love Vision Line, who dares wins. So if you have no momentum, what you need to do is think about maybe shortening up your tasks and try to get things together, get some wins, and then you build up momentum. If you're having a bad day, cut your losses. I did the craziest thing, and I was actually right. Once I was playing poker, and typically I'd win about $5 to $7. We just played for fun, nickels, dimes, and quarters, with the people I knew from work. And what happened is one day I lost $10. And I thought about my play, and it's like, I can't think of one thing I did wrong, and yet I lost $10. And then what happened is I went to my roommate Brett, and I described to him everything, and he said, "You did everything right. You did everything correct. But here was your mistake. It's irrational. It's not true. But what does happen is streaks of bad occurrences. It's like in roulette, when the wheel shows up 20 straight times red. There is no reasoning for it, but it does happen. When you recognize, once he said, your big mistake is you should have recognized that it just wasn't your day, that you were losing a lot on low probability hands for you to lose. And so what you should have done was quit." And I thought about that. And then what happened one day at work is everything went wrong. The power supply went down. A wire came loose, which caused something to burn out. And by 10 o'clock, everything had just gone wrong. And my engineer was becoming very frustrated. And the harder he tried, the worse it was getting. And I said to him, "Paul, go home." He's like, "I can't go home." I said, "Yes, you can. It's just one of those days." And so I told him, "When was the last time you picked up your son from school? When was the last time you got to spend a little more time with your wife?" I said, "Take today off and we'll go at it tomorrow." And so he got, I caught holy hell for doing that. Everybody came and said, "Where's Paul?" I said, "I sent him home." They asked me why, and I said, "We're having a bad day." But the thing is, that allowed Paul to take some time off to recharge. And then the next day we went at it and everything started working again. And this is what I mean. Work longer, fit the schedule if you've got that momentum. Here's the other thing of where you can get things for free. There's not much difference between good and great. There's not much difference between the person who gets an A and the person who gets a B. And what people don't recognize, and I've won lots of awards, and the people who didn't get those awards basically didn't put in as much as I did. And it's because I recognize the return is always not linear. People think if I work 4 hours instead of 2 hours, I get double the return. No, you can get more than double the return. So 6 hours, your return is 90, but put in 3 more hours, and all of a sudden, it's 250. Here's an example of exponential return. So we have 2 grad students, and one at 6 o'clock, and he has dinner. He said, "Okay, it's dinner time," and then he goes to bed. The second grad student, and this was my approach, I would look ahead, what do I have to do? If I just put in 4 more hours, I could get it into the furnace. And that furnace step is 8 hours. So guess what? Maybe I'm having dinner at 11 o'clock, but while I'm sleeping, that furnace is running. I'm making progress. The next grad student comes back. He puts in his 4 hours and then puts in the furnace. Next thing I realize is the next step is 10 hours, and then I have another 10-hour furnace run. So I put in that 10 hours where he's leaving at 4. And so by the third day, I'm 2 steps ahead. These little things add up very quickly. Days start to become weeks, weeks start to become months, and months start to become years. And this is why I graduated so quickly. The third tenet is you have to be who you need to be. This is the leadership aspect. You can't always be who you want to be. You have to overcome your biases, and this builds agility and flexibility into your company. Gandhi, these are 3 leaders I greatly respect. Gandhi What did Gandhi do? Well, it would have been really easy, after all the British did, to turn to violence. But Gandhi realized that turning to violence wasn't any kind of solution. And so this is where he went after passive approaches. The middle picture is of Susan B. Anthony. Now, when you think of Susan B. Anthony, you think of women's rights and things like that. But no, Susan B. Anthony was actually a humanist. She did more than women's rights. She was actually an abolitionist. She fought against slavery first, because Susan B. Anthony believed in the equality of all people. She didn't live long enough to see women get the vote, but she believed in it. The third picture is of Malcolm X, who's a personal hero of mine. He was a man who was a drug dealer and a drug user, criminal, and basically at the bottom of society. And then he's introduced to Islam, and he cleans up his act. He becomes a great believer in Islam. But then he believes in separatism, that he believes in segregation, that black people should have nothing to do with white people. And then what happens? He goes on a journey to Mecca and realizes that he's wrong. That he realizes that we're all brothers in the eyes of God. And so we need to all come together. And so Malcolm X to me is extraordinary because it's the most American story, a story of transformation. And how many people can change as many times as he did? But he changed because he needed to be the person, what he needed to be. Now, I have a teenage daughter. Well, she was a teenager once. Now she's 39. But anyway, my daughter, we weren't getting along. And my wife came to me and she said, and actually she's my stepdaughter, but I consider her to be my daughter because my attitude about family is you're in or you're out. You can't be halfway with regards to this. But anyway, what ended up happening is that we weren't getting along and I would not compromise. And I believed in discipline and this is what she needed and everything else. And then my wife came to me and she's somebody I greatly trust and listen to. And she said, look, you are absolutely right. Everything you're saying is absolutely correct. But here's the problem. I know my daughter. And the thing I know is that if you keep this up, you will lose her. She will shut you out altogether. He said, so you have a choice to make. Do you want to be right or do you want to lose her? And so at that moment, I realized you can't always be the parent you want to be. You have to be the parent you need to be. And so I backed off. Our relationship got better and then things healed and mended. And then I was able to slowly start injecting some of the things I thought she should be doing. And so you as a leader of a startup, you can't always be the person you want to be. You have to be the person you need to be. Just because I had one CEO who didn't like doing finances, and I knew we were in trouble. And so I ended up having to bail the company out, which I greatly resented. But I realized that he didn't understand that he needed to be the person he needed to be, not what he wanted to be. Steve Jobs failed at Apple. He got obsessed with the 28 Shades of White or whatever he was doing. And so when he came back, he realized he needed to delegate more, listen to other people. Bill Belichick failed in his first go-round in coaching, and he thought about his mistakes, and he made changes. The third group is the founders of Intel. Arthur Rock, legendary VC in Silicon Valley, said these are the most important people in Intel. Number one is Bob Noyce. I met Bob Noyce once. High energy guy. This is a guy who had a private plane and would fly to Tahiti for the weekend. And very smart man. Next is Gordon Moore. And then finally, Andy Grove. Definite tough guy. And so he said, in that order, these are the most important people in Intel. What happened is Bob Noyce stepped down from Intel. And he realized, look, my style of leadership and everything else is great for a startup. You need that high energy guy. But then what you need is stability, and you need smarts. And that's why Gordon Moore took over. And then once they were on solid ground, then you need the chainsaw. You need an ass kicker. And so you've got Andy Grove. To put it in perspective, when Andy Grove left Intel, Intel was worth $172 billion. Today, they're worth like 160. And so you see, and Andy Grove stepped down in the 1990s. So this is over 20 years ago. The valuation of Intel really hasn't gone up at all. But each of these men were willing to step down at a certain time because they realized that the company needed someone else. They needed to be what they needed to be. And so that's the last lesson. These are the tenets. If you believe in these things and you understand these things, then this will help you get through uncertainty. In the next lecture, we'll talk about the mechanics of how you make this stuff work.